Okay, I'll start then. Yeah, so today we're going to learn about potassium balance and hyperkalemia. I'll quickly go through potassium balance because it's very complex and you have to think about the kidney and the intracellular structures. But then to the main part, which is hyperkalemia, which is the most important part because that is what you'll see regularly in your emergencies and you'll be expected to manage it before you can dialyze the patient in many cases. Okay, so I think I've annotated by mistake. Yeah, okay. So the total body potassium is around 3000 milliequivalents, and primarily, as opposed to sodium, it is an intracellular ion. Sodium, as you know, is mostly found in the extracellular space. However, potassium is in the intracellular space, 98%. So the intracellular concentration is 140 milliequivalents, and outside it is 3.5 to 5 milliequivalents, which is a normal value. And you call it as hyperkalemia when it goes above 5.5 milliequivalent. So you see the narrow range of potassium that it has to be maintained in, otherwise it can have devastating consequences. And it is this ratio of intracellular to extracellular potassium, which is around 98/1, which is the major determinant of the resting membrane potential. So actually our life depends upon the value of potassium outside the cell. The key concepts in maintaining potassium balance is, as you all know, there is the most important part of our life is the sodium potassium ATPase, which pumps out 3 sodium ions and pumps in 2 potassium ions in the cell. And that is what creates a potassium gradient across the cell membrane. And this is critical to maintain any excitable tissue, nervous or muscle. And the internal balance of potassium is maintained mainly by catecholamines and insulin. Insulin is a major factor that determines how potassium is regulated across the cell membrane. Insulin, what it does is it shifts the potassium into the cell, and that you'll realize in the management part also. The insulin binding to the cell surface receptor stimulates glucose uptake in insulin responsive tissue, mainly through GLUT4. And insulin, how does it do it? It increases the sensitivity of the cell to intracellular sodium. It translocates and there is activation of the sodium potassium ATPase, and it inhibits potassium efflux. So that is how it maintains this tight balance. Catecholamines, alpha adrenergic receptors impair entry, and beta adrenergic receptors promote entry of potassium into the cell. And you will learn this in management, how we use this property of beta adrenergic receptors to promote potassium entry into the cell and thus help in treating hyperkalemia. And this entry is also mediated by the sodium potassium ATPase. In urinary handling, potassium is a very small ion and it's freely filtered into the glomerulus. Bulk of it, however, is reabsorbed in the proximal tubule, and 10% of filtered load reaches the distal nephron. Okay, now the excretion. So since potassium has to be excreted into the urine, that begins in the DCT, and excretion is mainly determined by principal cells. There are 3 major factors that stimulate the secretion or the excretion of potassium into the urine. So when does the excretion of or secretion of potassium from the kidney into the urine increase? The reflexes increase when there is an increase in plasma potassium concentration, obviously, when there is an increase in aldosterone secretion. So remember, aldosterone increases the reabsorption of sodium and increases the secretion of potassium. Okay, so it helps in sodium retention and potassium excretion. And when there is an increased delivery of sodium and water to the distal tubule. So a patient who has proper perfusion into the kidney and there is distal delivery of sodium and water, he will have a proper, well-stimulated potassium excretion. So do you think of the other ways? If there is decreased renal perfusion, for example, the patient is in cardiac failure, there is decreased sodium and water delivery to the distal tubule, and the potassium will not get excreted well, and hence there is hyperkalemia. So a cause of hyperkalemia in these states of cardiac failure or liver failure is the decreased distal delivery of sodium and water. Okay. Now you look at this cortical collecting duct cell, and this is the ATPase. This is a little complex. You go back and read about it. This is the ENaC channel, which is the epithelial sodium channel, and this is what is stimulated by the aldosterone. Okay, when this is stimulated, the sodium increases. This is the luminal side, and this is the interstitial or the blood side. So when this is stimulated, sodium goes out more, potassium comes in more here, and through the ROMK channels, the potassium goes out. So the more the secretion of aldosterone and more the stimulation of ENaC channels, more is the stimulation of ROMK or ROMK channels, and that is what takes the potassium outside. So ENaC channels do not directly stimulate excretion of potassium, but it is through this mechanism. Because they increase sodium concentration in the cell, it stimulates the sodium potassium ATPase, which in turn causes potassium influx into the cell and thus efflux into the lumen or into the urine. Okay. Now let us look at the key concepts again. So ingestion, when you ingest potassium, most of it is taken up by the liver and the muscles. And as mentioned before, it is stimulated mainly by insulin. And as I mentioned, beta adrenergic receptors also stimulate uptake through the sodium potassium ATPase activity. So everything that we learn about physiology is very, very important, because that is how you will get to the management part of it. And because when plasma potassium increases, it stimulates aldosterone, which stimulates the ENaC, that stimulates sodium retention from the kidney and potassium excretion. Okay, I hope that is clear. Aldosterone, as I mentioned, is produced by zona glomerulosa and acts on mineralocorticoid receptors. I've already mentioned this. Stimulates sodium ATPase and direct effect on potassium permeability through the ROMK receptors. Okay, potassium excretion is highly efficient. It has to be efficient because there is such a narrow range that we have to maintain the potassium in. Increased load causes increased excretion due to increased activity and density of potassium channels, increased sodium potassium activity, and increased ENaC activity. Potassium intake causes hyperkalemia, mostly in people with impaired renal function only. So if a patient has a normal renal function and you tell him to keep drinking coconut water, it is not going to increase the potassium because it is such an efficient mechanism. But people who have renal failure, who are on ACE inhibitors for that matter, who have tendencies of hyperkalemia, they are not going to do well if they have too much of potassium load. So intake or ingestion of potassium is very, very important and should be regulated in people who have even a minor change in their renal functions. Okay, how does hyperkalemia occur? Now there can either be two mechanisms. One is increased, as I said, in a normal renal function, the ingestion does not cause much change. So there is either an increased release from cells or there is a reduced excretion, right? That is what will cause hyperkalemia. Otherwise, even if you keep taking a lot of pot chlor syrup or coconut water or banana for that matter, if your renal function is well, if you do not consuming any drugs that can cause hyperkalemia, you are not going to have hyperkalemia. Okay, so it's either the breakdown of cells, poor uptake into the cells, or reduced urinary potassium. Okay. Okay. What is pseudo hyperkalemia? Pseudo hyperkalemia is when you see a blood sample that shows a high potassium and you're not expecting it. So your first thing is that when do you suspect it? You suspect it when you're not expecting it. For 25-year-old normal male, kidney function is normal. You find a high potassium, please recheck. Okay, don't start treating him with calcium gluconate. Okay. So during or after the blood sampling, there is mechanical trauma during venipuncture. In fact, when I used to study in MBBS and during my internship, it was a rule in our college not to use a tourniquet when we are doing electrolytes. So ideally, you should not be using a tourniquet when you are taking samples for potassium. Okay, when you tell the patient to repeatedly clench the fist, that is what is going to cause problems again and hyperkalemia. Other causes, if you let the sample remain in for too long, it can release potassium from platelets. High TLC count in patients with CLL, because the cell is so fragile, it can burst open and release potassium. And this was very common in CMC when we used to transport the samples in pneumatic systems. and regularly potassium would be a little high. So passive potassium permeability of red cells is a familial disorder and is rarely seen, so not very. Okay, so I'm sure you've seen many ABGs. Whenever there is a metabolic acidosis, you would realize that most of the times you find a hyperkalemia along with it. Now, how does that occur? It's very common to say that yes, metabolic acidosis, hyperkalemia occurs, even if the kidney function is normal. It's not always that the kidney function is bad and that is what has caused the metabolic acidosis as well as the hyperkalemia. But metabolic acidosis independently also causes hyperkalemia, and this is how it does it. So look at the first figure in the figure 3.8. What it shows is this is the outside of the cell or the extracellular, and this is the inside of the cell. Okay, outside and inside. And you look at this H plus ion, there is a sodium H plus exchanger, right? So what happens in acidosis is this H plus outside is going to decrease. Okay, so H plus outside is going to decrease because there is acidosis. There is pH is going to decrease, so the H plus is going to increase. So this pump is going to fail. Now, when this pump is going to fail because the H plus ions are increasing, the pH is decreasing, there is high concentration of H plus outside, so this pump is not going to function well. This exchanger is not going to function well. Since this exchanger is not going to function well, the sodium is not going in, and the stimulus to the sodium potassium ATPase is going to go off. Thus, this pump also stops functioning, and the potassium that was supposed to go in does not go in and remains out. So that is the mechanism of how, mainly, this is one mechanism of how acidemia or acidosis, that means an increase in H plus concentration outside the cell, causes hyperkalemia. So this is one and the major mechanism. The other mechanism is bicarbonate. Okay, so bicarbonate is going to fall. Look at this. This is a bicarbonate sodium symporter. So it's the same direction movement. So bicarbonate is going to fall in acidosis. Since it's going to fall, this pump is again not going to function, because if there is fall, this gradient decreases. Since this pump is not going to function, this pump is also not going to function. Correct? And thus, again, like in a similar manner, like the A figure, potassium is not going to go in, right? In this case, this is a third mechanism how it causes. There is a bicarbonate chloride exchanger. So what happens is outside bicarbonate is decreasing because of acidosis. Because this is decreasing, there is an increase in gradient because the movement is this way. So this pump is going to hyperfunction. Thus, since this pump is going to hyperfunction, the other pump, which is a chloride potassium symporter, is also going to hyperfunction, and the potassium is pumped out of the cell and causes hyperkalemia. So these are the three mechanisms by which there is an increase of potassium in cases of metabolic acidosis. I hope that is clear. Okay. Right. Now, where do you miss it? Okay. Yeah. So these are the various, the same thing, but they've shown it in one figure. So metabolic acidosis, there is fall in extracellular pH, inhibits the rate of exchange of sodium and H plus. Okay, accumulation of intracellular H plus, reduced sodium. This is basically the same thing written that I've explained. Go through this. Okay, the other point to note is that this happens in most acidosis, but it does not happen in lactic and ketoacidosis and other organic acidosis. Now, why is that? This happens because lactates and organic acids go through a monocarboxylate transporter in the cell. And when they go through that monocarboxylate transporter, they take H plus ions with them into the cell. So what happens is, when the H plus ions into the cells go, the pH in the cell actually decreases more than the extracellular pH. So all these mechanisms get reversed. So the potassium that was supposed to increase outside does not increase because the pH inside the cell, or the H plus ions inside the cell, go up and the pH inside the cell goes down more as compared to the extracellular pH. Because with the lactates, with the other organic acids, through the monocarb oxidate transporter, the H plus ions also go in. Okay, so there is a larger fall in intracellular pH and bicarbonate. Thus, there is a net cellular uptake of potassium. In case of respiratory acidosis, the degree of hyperkalemia is also less as compared to metabolic acidosis, but the reason is not known till now. How does insulin help? So what insulin does is it promotes the entry of potassium into the cells. Glucose also stimulates secretion of insulin. So when you give a glucose load, it secretes more insulin, but I will tell you in the next few slides how more of glucose can actually cause hyperkalemia. So states of insulin deficiency, fasting, octreotide, or diabetes can cause hyperkalemia. Increased osmolality also causes hyperkalemia. What it does is there's a loss of cell water which raises the potassium intracellularly, and thus there's a favorable gradient for the potassium efflux. Also, when there is hyperosmolarity outside, what happens is there are channels that open that take in solvent from the intracellular part to the extracellular part, causing the crenation or the contraction of the cells. And this solvent through these channels sometimes takes potassium along with it, which is also called solvent drag. So remember, in ketoacidosis, hyperkalemia is not due to acidosis. Okay, it's mostly ketoacidosis, as I told you, is a organic acid. So organic acid does not cause hyperkalemia. The ketoacidosis hyperkalemia that you see in diabetic ketoacidosis is not because of the acidosis as such, but it is because of insulin deficiency and high osmolality. So I've taught you that high osmolality, how does it cause hyperkalemia, and insulin deficiency also causes. These are the two reasons for hyperkalemia in diabetic ketoacidosis and not acidosis per se. Okay, also it is when osmolarity is increased in hypernatremia, if you give too much of mannitol, sucrose containing IVIG, and radiocontrast media, all of these that increase the osmolarity in the blood can cause hyperkalemia. The other method of increasing potassium in the body is cell breakdown, correct? So trauma, cytotoxic, radiation injury, hypothermia, and tumor lysis syndrome commonly causes. These are the common causes of hyperkalemia. Again, exercise, how it causes hyperkalemia. One is that it can cause pseudo hyperkalemia, but it actually can cause true hyperkalemia also. Okay, it's not always pseudo. Pseudo is only when there is repeated fist clenching, that is a local hyperkalemia. But it can cause a generalized hyperkalemia. Why? Because it causes a delay between potassium exit and subsequent reuptake during depolarization. So during depolarization, the cell is not able to take up the released potassium. So what it does is it lets it be in the plasma, and that is what shows as hyperkalemia. Okay, increased number of potassium, open potassium channels in the cells. These channels are inhibited by ATP, and as you know, these ATP gets removed during exercise. So once ATP is removed, there is an increased number of potassium channels. And local hyperkalemia causes vasodilatation and increases blood flow to the muscle. So it is favorable for the body to have some hyperkalemia, and so it's a reflex mechanism. So you see a patient who's run a marathon and comes to you exhausted. You do a potassium level and you might see a rise of up to 2 milliequivalent per liter. So you should not take it immediately after excessive workout. Obviously, people who are preconditioned, who are athletes, do not show these because their body gets conditioned. And if a renal failure patient runs a marathon, or patients who are on beta blockers run marathons, they can come with sudden and severe and life-threatening hyperkalemia. Hyperkalemia obviously is arrhythmogenic in the susceptible people, especially after exercise. Exercise itself is arrhythmogenic in susceptible people. And catecholamines are also released during exercise, which limit excessive hyperkalemia by promoting potassium uptake, as mentioned before, that catecholamines also regulate potassium entry into the cells. However, catecholamines in excess can cause arrhythmias. Hyperkalemic periodic paralysis. You've all heard of hypokalemic periodic paralysis. I recently got a case last week. But there is hyperkalemic periodic paralysis, and it is one of the severe forms of hyperkalemia which has to be treated urgently, as I will mention. It is because of an autosomal dominant condition. So if you find, please do the screening of the family. Other causes which increase cellular shift are digitalis toxicity, excessive blood transfusion, succinylcholine. So succinylcholine is a very important drug which we commonly use in rapid sequence intubation. However, if you get a polytrauma patient or you are suspecting a kidney injury in a patient, please do not give succinylcholine. We've done that. We've been there in the emergency department. We've given succinylcholine and the ABG has come back with a potassium of 7. In fact, in CMC, we had a rule that before intubating, you do an ABG. You used to keep an ABG machine there in the emergency for this reason. So if you suspect hyperkalemia, please do not give succinylcholine for rapid sequence intubation. It can cause sudden arrest. Okay, there are other drugs that can also cause. Reduced potassium excretion can happen in reduced aldosterone secretion, or there is a resistance to aldosterone. As mentioned before, there is reduced distal sodium and water delivery, for example, in contracted states or in failure patients, and acute on chronic kidney disease. Reduced aldosterone secretion happens in these all conditions. You can go through this. Very important to remember is ACE inhibitors and NSAIDs. NSAIDs are most misused drugs in the society, and I think we all forget before prescribing how dangerous they can be. Okay, so reduced response to aldosterone, again, that can happen due to many drugs like aldosterone antagonists, and they are used to treat various conditions. Acute and chronic kidney disease, I think you can go through these one by one. They are too much to remember. Okay, reduced distal sodium and water delivery happens when there is an effective decrease in effective arterial blood volume. Heart failure, cirrhosis, true volume depletion can also cause. Okay, most commonly in acute kidney injury, it is due to release of potassium, either due to rhabdomyolysis or tumorilysis. And in chronic patients, as I said, in dietary potassium is very important in chronic kidney disease patients. Patients who have low urine output can retain potassium. Even chronic kidney disease itself is an inflammatory state now, and it has been shown to cause sarcopenia, which was in fact my thesis. And sarcopenia can cause muscle breakdown and release potassium into the cells. Reduced secretion of or response to aldosterone, fasting, and uremic toxins may inhibit sodium potassium pump directly and cause hyperkalemia by mechanisms that I've already mentioned. There can be multiple factors in the same patient. The patient might have chronic kidney disease, might be on beta blockers and ACE inhibitors, and would have exercised and come to you. You can find a significant hyperkalemia in such patients. You can read about pseudo-hyperaldosteronism and how ureterojejenostomy, because urine contains a lot of potassium, and that is what is absorbed back into by the pseudo-ureters. These are the various drugs and their mechanisms, how they cause potassium. I'll send the presentation and you can go through them one by one. Medications induced hyperkalemia, other than the medications that we've already mentioned. Renin inhibitors, ENaC inhibitors, Yasmin, which is I think it's a contraceptive, and nafamostat protease inhibitor, which is used in the treatment of pancreatitis. Okay, so how will a patient of hyperkalemia present to you? If there is a cardiac conduction abnormality that you see on ECG or you find on pulse clinically, or there is a muscle paralysis, it is serious, needs urgent treatment. Immediately, you don't have time. This usually happens when the potassium is more than 7. But if there is an acute rise, if someone's potassium is baseline 3.5 and this patient suddenly comes with a potassium of 6, do not take it lightly. Okay, even at 6 or even at 5.5, such patient might go into a paralysis or a cardiac conduction anomaly. Okay, the muscle weakness is generally ascending and flaccid and could mimic GBS. So please do electrolytes before starting treatment for GBS. Rarely it can involve the respiratory muscles. Generally, potassium abnormalities, hypo or hyper, do not cause respiratory muscle involvement. So you can have a patient who's absolutely quadriplegic, but generally it does not cause respiratory involvement. Okay, in ECG, the first sign and the most important sign that you see in such patients is a tall peak T wave, and there is some shortening of the QT interval. I'll show a photograph in the next slide. There is progressive lengthening of PR and QRS. The P wave ultimately disappears, and then you get what is known as a sine wave pattern as the concentration of potassium increases. You can also find a Brugada like ECG, but although the next figure shows that there is mild, moderate, and severe hyperkalemia depending upon the levels, and this is how the ECG changes show. But there is actually no progression of ECG changes, and severity does not correlate with the potassium levels. So even at a potassium of 5.5, if it is sudden and severe, you might get a sine wave pattern. Do not get befooled. It will happen only at 7. And even at 7 potassium, you might just get only tall T waves. You might not get a prolonged QRS at all. So it's not a reliable tool to diagnose. But yes, if there are severe ECG changes present, you know that there is an urgent need to treat it. Otherwise, there can be cardiac arrhythmias, which can be life-threatening. Okay, so at mild, mostly peak T waves and prolonged PR segment. At moderate, which is 6.5 to 8, loss of P wave. Some books mention this as 7, others mention this as 8. Okay, and you look at severe, which is more than 8, you almost get a sine wave pattern. Right? Other cardiac anomalies that can happen is RBBB, LBBB, bifascicular blocks, AV blocks, anything and everything can happen in case of hyperkalemia. How do you approach? Most important point is medications, and you ask for history of urine output, history of renal disease. Many people will tell you they had a kidney disease 2 years ago, creatinine was around 2, and they will forget to mention it. They'll say, doctor said that the kidney is okay. But then there's a sudden jump because they've not taken care, they've not rechecked, and they will present with ECG changes, or they'll present with muscle, CNS abnormalities. Okay, so you look for diet. What diet are they taking, especially in renal patients? Risks for kidney failures, especially desi medications or alternate medications that they take. You look at the pulse and the regularity, pedal edema, pulmonary edema, all will point to a renal failure patient or hyperkalemia that can happen due to a contracted state, as I mentioned before. So there are 10 minutes left. Look at the ECG, do labs, serum osmolality, renal profile, CBC, urinary pH. Urinary sodium, why is it important? It's not only important in hyponatremia that we mentioned in the last class, but also it tells you what is the distal sodium delivery. And I told you when it is decreased, that is what can cause hyperkalemia. This is something called TTKG or transtubular potassium gradient. This is to calculate what is the response of the tubules. Now you can go back and read about this, but up to date says that there is not much role of it now because it poorly correlates with how you have to treat hyperkalemia. So basically the thing is that you see how much urine, how much potassium is present in urine. And if the TTKG is less than 6, collecting tubules are responding inappropriately to hyperkalemia, and thus the secretion of potassium is impaired. This line is important, and that's the only thing you need to know. How do you treat? Now, severity is mild, moderate, and severe. As mentioned, see, I told you some books say 7, some 7.5, and some mention severe as 8. The principle is to protect the cardiac tissue. How do you do that? You have to rapidly reduce potassium, and then your eventual aim is to remove it from the body. So urgent treatment is in patients who have clinical signs and symptoms. So muscle weakness and cardiac abnormalities. If there are ECG abnormalities, it's an urgency. Okay. Harrison says that even if it's more than 6.5, even in the absence of ECG changes, you should treat it aggressively. With potassium of more than 5.5, if there is an ongoing tissue breakdown, for example, in tumor lysis, you have to treat it. And in all cases where it is more than 5.5, you should admit to the hospital, preferably in the ICU, because you need a cardiac monitor at all times. Prompt treatment, that means within 6 to 12 hours in patients on hemodialysis presenting outside dialysis hours. If the patient is coming for dialysis, potassium is high, don't worry much. Those with marginally increased renal functions and those who have to be optimized for surgery. And slowly you can treat in people who have on, for example, on mild hyperkalemia and CKD patients. Those on ACE inhibitors. So your patient on ACE inhibitors, mild CKD, you can stop the ACE inhibitor or reduce the dose and wait. Do not worry, they will not go into an arrest very soon, unless they suddenly jump into the potassium suddenly jumps. Chronic drug induced like NSAID induced has to be slowly corrected. Rule out pseudo hyperkalemia. Okay, how do you antagonize the cardiac effects? You give IV calcium. So what it does is raises action potassium threshold and reduces the excitability of the cardiac tissue. So calcium gluconate does not decrease potassium, it just stabilizes the heart. Contrary to the popular belief of giving calcium gluconate in 10 minutes, it should actually be given in 2 to 3 minutes. If there is calcium chloride, you give only 3 to 4 ml. Ideally and preferably, if you have a central line, give it through that. But through a central line, you have to give it a little more slowly. So 2 to 3 minutes, double that time. Peripherally, you can give it over 2 to 3 minutes. Many people still give it over 10 to 20 minutes. Doesn't really make a difference, but 2 to 3 minutes can save lives if its potassium is increasing suddenly. Effect starts in 1 to 3 minutes and lasts for 30 to 60 minutes. Insulin and dextrose, many people give it together in one solution, but it is seen that if you give insulin first, so 10 units of regular insulin, followed immediately by 50 ml of 50% dextrose, it gives a better effect and causes good reduction in potassium immediately. So effect begins in 10 to 20 minutes. If the sugars are high, you give only insulin. And only dextrose is not recommended, as I told you before. Yes, it might stimulate insulin, but highly concentrated dextrose can cause increase in osmolality and then can cause hyperkalemia by the mechanisms I already mentioned. Okay, hypoglycemia after insulin is common, so you might have to top it up with some dose of dextrose or DNS after that. Okay, rapid reduction also caused by beta agonist salbutamol. Commonly, we give Astalin nebulizations. You can also give IV salbutamol if available. Please remember this dose. It is 10 to 20 milligram of nebulized salbutamol, which is 4 respules. Please do not give one nebulization and be happy. Give at least 4. There is one respule is 2.5 milligram. You have to give at least 4 to 8 respules to decrease potassium by 1 to 1.5 milliequivalent per liter. So don't give happy मैंने nebulize कर दिया, it's not done. You have to nebulize with 4 to 8 respules of salbutamol. Okay, I think we are going to finish soon. IV bicarbonate has no role in acute management, might have a role in delayed management. Okay, removal of potassium by cation exchange resins that we commonly use, K-bind and all. Okay, so this is K-bind. Please, in acute settings, it does not help. It takes a day or two to cause effect. And the most important and the most devastating side effect that it can cause is intestinal necrosis. Now, it was seen that initially it was given with sorbitol suspension initially, and it was seen that more intestinal necrosis happened in sorbitol people who were given K-bind with sorbitol solution. So they started giving without sorbitol, but then they realized that even without sorbitol, it causes intestinal necrosis. So it is not ideal. Okay, there is very high risk of intestinal necrosis in post-op patients, in patients who have intestinal ileus, who are taking opiates, who have obstruction, or who have ulcerative colitis or C. difficile infection. Okay, so it is recommended only when you know that dialysis will not be available, when there is life-threatening hyperkalemia and your other things are not working, right? So please do not give K-bind regularly. This is one of the most commonly used drugs in hyperkalemia by many nephrologists and physicians. It is really dangerous if you give it. If you have other things, why don't you use them first? Okay, so I do not use it first. Cation exchange ranges. This is a new cation exchange resin, patiromer. This can be used in hyperkalemic emergency. It has been shown not to cause intestinal necrosis. So let this come into the market properly and you can use it without any fear. 8.4 gram daily. This is a very, very new resin, exchange resin, which is sodium zirconium cyclosilicate. And this is given in the dose of 10 gram TDS. But I don't think that it is not available in India. Amritsar, it's not available at all. Okay, so how do you remove potassium by other methods? Some people give loop diuretics. Yes, it can help. It's an alternative therapy, but please do not give it in hypovolemic patients. In hypovolemic patients, in fact, saline will be helpful. And these two can be combined also. So many people, what they do is they first hydrate and then they give Lasix. That's okay. That's an alternative option. The important thing to learn is this should be done before giving K-bind. So this is an alternative therapy. Please use this before K-bind. This is not very logical, but it is still better than giving K-bind. Hemodialysis is the most effective and reliable method. So in resistant hyperkalemia, you have to use it. It is indicated in severe renal impairment. However, if the patient has an ongoing tissue breakdown, even after hemodialysis, you can have a rebound hyperkalemia, which can be life-threatening. So this is the Harrison's flow chart or algorithm for how to manage hyperkalemia. You can go through this slowly if you want. See, you look at this urine sodium here. Very important. I always look at urine sodium whenever you are evaluating patients. It's a small and cheap test. People don't use it. In hyponatremia, hyperkalemia, hypernatremia, in cases of heart failure, please use urine sodium and it will tell you what is the state of effective circulatory volume. Because if urine sodium is reduced, the effective circulatory volume is reduced because the distal nephron is not getting sodium or water into it. Okay, so you can go through this. You can use TTKG as I mentioned before, but it up to date says that there is not much role of it now, so you can avoid it also. Okay, you always have to look for drugs. Please look at the history of drugs, how they cause hyperkalemia and which all drugs you can stimulate. It's a long list, and please do not forget NSAIDs because that is what is commonly prescribed. I think that is my class. These are my references, and I will post this on the group as well as on YouTube. Thank you for joining.